The crimes, the criminals, why did they do it? Who got hurt? Did they meet justice or commit the perfect crime? You'll find all the clues at Jim Harold's Crime Scene. Welcome to the Crime Scene. I am Jim Harold. So glad to be with you once again. Now, many times we talk about kind of these violent crimes. We talk about Jack the Ripper, or these historic cases. But today we're going to talk about something I think that's very practical, because most crime, financial crime specifically, is done by people that you know and who are ostensibly close to you. So we have a fantastic guest to talk about these types of things. Her new book is Love and Money: Protecting Yourself from Angry Exes, Wacky Relatives, Con Artists, and Inner Demons. I'm talking about Ann-Margaret Carrozza, and she will be joining us today to talk about this new book. She is a practicing wealth and estate planning attorney who served as a New York State Assemblywoman for 14 years. She has the highest possible attorney rating and is regularly featured as an expert legal contributor on TV shows such as E.T., Extra, Inside Edition, Good Morning America, Fox Business, The Doctors, and Dr. Phil. And by the way, Dr. Phil McGraw wrote the foreword to her book, and she lives on Long Island, New York with her family. Ann-Margaret, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, I think amongst most people there is this thought that, if I'm going to be taken advantage of financially or however, it's going to be from someone I don't know. But is that, as I said earlier, isn't that kind of a misnomer? Most crime is committed, this type of crime, by people you know and trust?
Well, we all know that we're living in a very litigious society, and there are con artists swarming all around us. But it comes as a great surprise to many people that we are more likely to be involved in a court battle with a former loved one than with a stranger. So this book is really about legal protections, and I strongly believe that is the next realm in personal finance. What does it matter whether I'm earning 3%, 4%, or 5% return on my portfolio if I have a 45% chance of losing my assets to a bad breakup, or to unexpected nursing home bills, or criminal con artists? So these are a compilation of legal protections that I have come upon over the course of my 20 years watching clients and their horror stories.
Now, I do want to say, anytime we talk about legal matters, Jim Harold Media LLC does not provide legal advice and ask you to consult your own attorney. But with that, we're going to go ahead and talk about some of these different things. Now, the first one you feature in the book, this to me is one of the toughest. I've been married for 21 years, but I remember when we were first going out, and then we got engaged, and then we did not have a prenuptial agreement. Now, luckily, everything has worked out. But the point is that at that time, it would have been very tough for me to say, hey, we ought to do. Well, I didn't have anything anyway. But anyway, it would have been very difficult because of the emotion of everything, saying, hey, we ought to sign this document. And I would think that's one of the more challenging things with the prenuptial agreement, kind of introducing that documentation and that legal agreement before marriage, just because of the emotion and you're in love and all of these different things. And then you say, hey, sign this paper. So how do you get over that and work through it? And why is it a good idea to do it, even though it might not be the most pleasant topic to bring up?
Well, I think that was a big push for me to write this book. I want to destigmatize it. So I want the conversation to move away from whether or not we have a prenup to what provisions we put in there. I think there is an outdated notion that the prenup only protects the party with more assets. I firmly believe that the party with fewer assets needs a seat at that table and needs to be protected in the event there's, again, a 45% chance that that marriage will not work out. So I think the most natural way to embark upon this conversation is in connection with our other estate planning. So if we're about to get married, we should probably think about redoing our will, our power of attorney, our healthcare proxy. So if we want to protect each other in the event of a death, shouldn't we also want to protect each other in the equally unpalatable event of a breakup? So within this book, I have some wacky clauses that people put in the prenups. Weight restrictions, social media restrictions, time spent with in-laws, on and on and on, so that couples look at these clauses and say, hey, that is out there. That's not for us. But we will do a prenup that has some positive, like a mission statement type of effect.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought about these little kind of clauses about weight restrictions and social media usage. That's interesting. Now, another thing, it used to be when two people met and wanted to have a relationship, they would get married. Now it's very common that people cohabitate. Now, whether that's out of convenience, whether they're friends, or actually if they're romantic partners, I didn't realize that cohabitation agreements are something outside of Sheldon on The Big Bang Theory, that cohabitation agreements are a real thing.
They are a real thing, and I would argue that cohabiting partners need a written agreement even more than married couples, because married couples, whether you like the laws that are on the books or not, there is a framework of laws for you to rely upon. Cohabiting couples, you're more likely to have the apartment lease or the deed to the house in one party's name. So with every fight, I don't want to have to worry about my belongings being thrown out on the front lawn, and I don't have a roof over my head. So at the very least, within a cohabitation agreement, we want to set forth living arrangements in the event of a breakup. And I also want to point out, and we talk about it in the book, we want to legally immunize ourselves from a quote-unquote breach of promise to marry suit. I don't know how many of your listeners are old enough to remember Lee Marvin? But
yes, palimony.
Yes, palimony is still alive and well. We also have breach of promise to marry suits in most states, whether it's in statute or in common law. And there was a Georgia case not too long ago, Shell v. Gibbs, a cohabiting couple. They became engaged while they were living together. He broke up with her. She sued him for $150,000 for emotional distress. Now, if you were to ask 10 out of 10 attorneys whether she had a prayer in the world of collecting, everyone would say no. Did she collect? Yes, because the jury was sympathetic to her crying on the stand that her feelings were hurt and she suffered emotional distress. So when the sympathy factor is at play, you really need to have something in writing to protect yourself.
And this one, I guess it is what it sounds like. What is a post-nuptial agreement? Well,
once we are already married, maybe we did a prenup and maybe we didn't do a prenup. A post-nuptial agreement is normally brought up in the time of a crisis. So I will often have a party come to my office in the event of marital infidelity. This is, the single biggest case for a post-nuptial agreement. So in one case, and I tell the story of Ken and Louise in the book, a true story, of course the names are changed. Louise comes in to see me. She has had it with the marriage. She caught him cheating for the second time, but she just wanted to stick it out until the kids were in college. That's not an uncommon scenario, but she wanted in writing the financial dissolution mapped out so they wouldn't have to start fighting a couple of years down the road. Ken, at that point, was groveling. He was tears in his eyes that somehow he thought the infidelity was going to make their relationship stronger. He was willing to sign anything in the world, and so it was that he signed this post-nuptial agreement, which gave her 60% of the assets in the event of a future episode of infidelity. Long story short, they got back on track. They went to couples therapy, and they ended up not getting divorced at that time. And things improved to the point where he asked her to engage in a sexual bucket list item of his, which was a threesome. So far from being a reluctant participant, Louise and Renee, the woman that they had the relationship with, they ended up falling in love and leaving Ken. And
Oh my.
when he tried to enforce the infidelity 60% settlement against Louise, it didn't count because Renee entered the relationship with Ken's permission. So Renee and Louise are now happily married, and Ken got 40% of the assets because his infidelity was the only one that counted at the time of a divorce. But that is a little bit of an extreme example, but post-nuptial agreements, I believe, should also be done by happily married couples. That comes as a surprise to many people, but I asked myself, I deal with estate planning every day of the week, and my husband and I have the normal married couple wills where everything goes to each other, and then upon the death of the second spouse, everything goes to the kids, right? That's the normal distribution. Sure. And I asked myself, if I die first, will my lovely husband be remarried in 3 days or 5 days? Because I know it's going to be pretty quick. And then I thought, well, what happens to our jointly accumulated assets if he remarries? I don't expect this woman to be older than him. She's probably going to be younger than him, and he will either be tricked out of the assets or something else. So we have a post-nuptial agreement that says whoever the surviving spouse is, in the event of a future remarriage, we legally promise to enter into a prenuptial agreement with that future hypothetical spouse. So a post-nuptial agreement is a cement foundation for your estate plan to make sure that the surviving spouse doesn't lose it all to a new wife or husband.
And that's something you don't think about. You don't think about it until somebody sits down and talks to you about it. And another thing I think a lot of people don't think about are, as you put it in the book here, Fido and Fluffy. Where do pets come into all of this?
Well, in every state in the United States, pets are treated like property. So that is in the event of death. The pets cannot inherit money, as we know from Leona Helmsley. And during life, when we break up, often, both parties want custody of the dogs or cats or fish, and a court will award custody to whoever can present the receipt for purchase or the adoption paperwork. And they take nothing into account with respect to the party's ability to provide a suitable home for the pet or provide affection and attention. So we call them a pet-nup. It can be a clause within a prenuptial agreement or a cohabitation agreement that sets forth who gets custody of the pets in the event of a breakup. And then I also encourage anyone with furry family members to deal with their care after death, so that they don't become pet orphans and end up in a unsuitable shelter.
Our guest today is Ann-Margaret Carrozza, and we're talking about her recent book, Love and Money, Protecting Yourself from Angry Exes, Wacky Relatives, Con Artists, and Inner Demons. Now, before we get back to the legal stuff, Dr. Phil McGraw wrote the foreword to that, and I'm sure that was quite a thrill. What's it like to work with Dr. Phil?
Well, Dr. Phil and Robin are absolutely phenomenal. I, like millions of Americans, know of Dr. Phil from TV, but when I started to get to know him by doing the expert appearances on the program, I learned so much about him. He's such a wonderful person. And what people don't realize, because he doesn't really talk about it publicly, is that he follows up with so many of the guests that are on the show. And he has donated, I think, something around $30 million of his own money, hooking people up with programs that are going to help them. And he really does follow up with these people. So it's really wonderful to see that he truly is the whole picture.
Yeah, that's very neat, and congratulations on having him write the foreword. I'm sure that was very helpful. That's very, very neat. And he must think, and obviously he thinks a lot of you, or he wouldn't have done it. So that's very cool.
Well, I think he sees that these subjects are increasingly popping up in family fights. One of my first litigated cases out of law school was two sisters fighting over a vacuum cleaner. Oh. So I was praying for the day where I would have better cases. I wasn't really able at the time to kick the case out of my office. But when I first sat down with my client fighting with her sister over a vacuum, I asked her, "You want to settle the case, right?" And I will never forget the response. She said, "I want to rip her leg from her ass." And I thought, okay,
well,
there is such animus there when we have a death in the family and things are not clearly spelled out either in a will or a trust, and the family is really at each other's throats. So, these are important issues to deal with in advance, certainly.
Now, and it seems like to me, the closer you are to someone, and you would know this just not only from a legal standpoint, just as a lawyer dealing with these things, you've seen a lot of human nature. It seems like the closer people are, that if there is a fracture and if there is a split, the hate and the animus is 10 times worse. Am I onto something?
I think you are. Some people say that love and hate are two sides of the same coin. But I think you're exactly right. The closer the relationship, the bigger the potential blow up on the other side.
Yeah, scary. Well, we talked about marriages. One of the most important outcomes of marriages are children. And, children and money, that's a big topic, and it's certainly one you cover in this book.
It's huge. And I would have to say that the single biggest question clients have when they come into my office is how to keep their money from going to a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law. So, within the context of their estate planning, they say, yes, I want my son to have everything, but I don't want that daughter-in-law getting her hands on it for whatever reason. Everyone has their own reason. And you may have heard that gifted or inherited assets are off limits if a child goes through a divorce. That is what we call the black letter law in every state. And I tell people that's the correct answer if you're on a game show, but the law does not always follow the black letter. A judge is free. Most states are not community property states. Most states are quote-unquote equitable distribution, which means that a judge can pretty much do whatever they want to do to achieve their sometimes fuzzy-headed sense of what equity is. So you really need to take careful steps within the estate planning to make sure that assets go to your child and then to grandchildren as opposed to an in-law. But even if the children don't get divorced, the single biggest mistake that I see people make is to give assets to children. And the single biggest asset that people do this with is their house. So they, quote unquote, turn over the house to the kids to prevent them from having to go through probate down the road or to keep the house safe from future possible nursing home bills that we all need to be thinking about now that we're living longer. But when we put the house in the kids' names, 5 different rotten things happen. Right off the bat, the parent loses any property tax exemptions that they may be benefiting from. I put the house in my son's name. If he gets divorced, she's going to have a claim to it. If my grandchildren apply for college financial aid, the house will count against them. And I'm giving the kids a capital gains problem. If I bought the house for $50,000 in 1978 and it's now worth $300,000, and I give it to them during life, they will have to pay capital gains taxes upon sale. But the cautionary tale that I tell in the book is a true story of a retired judge who put his home in his daughter's name. They got along beautifully. He had no trust issues that she was going to kick him out. But guess what happened?
She kicked him out.
No, she was a lovely person, was being the operative word. She was in a tragic car accident and died. Now, she didn't think of the house as belonging to her, so she never got around to writing a will. She was in her 30s. She had more debt than assets in her own mind. But when we don't have our own will, our state of residence has one for us, and it's called intestate succession. So in this young, tragic woman's state, the law said that everything went to her husband in the absence of a will. So now the retired judge's house is legally owned by his son-in-law. And several months after the funeral, the son-in-law says to Pop that he was going to start dating again, and it was going to be a little awkward to bring women to the house with his dead wife's father living there. It was going to kind of be a mood killer. So maybe Pop would be more comfortable making alternative living arrangements. So, that is the story that I tell clients that really keeps them from doing that. If you want to prevent your kids from going through probate and you want to protect the house from future possible long-term care bills, definitely do a trust. Don't just put the assets in the kids' names. You never know what's going to happen.
The thing is that when you sign a legal document, and you've got to remember that's binding. It's not what somebody says. I had a lawyer tell me once, because I had this was 20 years ago, someplace I worked, and they said if you left within so many months, you'd have to repay the cost of the training that they sent you on to Florida. And I thought, well, they're not gonna hold me to that, because I was leaving because they really didn't promise what they said they would do. And I decided I wanted to leave them. They held me to it. When I went to the lawyer, he used the phrase 4 corners. It's in the contract. It's not what, somebody, not because you think your boss likes you or give you a break. It was in the 4 corners. So they were going to hold me to it, and I had to pay it back. And the thing is that also I remember reading about some of the people out there listening might remember a guy by the name, he's passed now, Jimmy Dean. He used to be a singer, and he was the Sausage King. Well, he signed over his company, sold his company to a large conglomerate, and he said it was kind of a handshake deal. I'm sure there were documents as well, but the thing is that as long as the guy that ran that corporation, he could still do the commercials, he still had input, all that good stuff. And he thought, this is great. This is fantastic. But when that guy left the company, the successor came in, and Jimmy Dean said that they wouldn't even let him do the commercials anymore. They had a guy who sounded like him do the commercials.
I remember that.
So the thing is that, again, when you sign something over to someone, even the person you're dealing with across the table may have all good intentions, but they might not be on the other side of the table when it comes to fulfill the points of that agreement.
That is brilliantly put. And in the book, we have a chapter, Toxic Agreements. And you don't have to be unintelligent to be on the wrong end of a written agreement. And in the book, I tell the story of a young man bringing his grandmother into a nursing home, and there was a ton of paperwork for him to sign, and she was ill at the time, and she wasn't up to signing, so he was signing all of these things, and then someone told him, hey, you should have had a lawyer look at this stuff. So he brought the documents into me, and they really didn't look that bad to me, Jim. It was, Roger was promising to make the grandmother's assets available to the nursing home. So I said to him, worst case scenario, we're not able to engage in any quote unquote Medicaid planning, or we can't shelter her assets. He said that's fine. The nursing home should be entitled to all of her assets. They exhausted all of her assets over the course of several years, and someone at the nursing home was asleep at the wheel and didn't file a Medicaid application for her.
Oh.
And when she died, they were on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they looked at the old paperwork and they sued Roger for the grandmother's nursing home bills, and they won in court. And he ended up having to mortgage his home. He ended up getting divorced, and he's really not a happy camper today. So that's an example of a bad contract that was, in my opinion, incorrectly interpreted by the judge. But a lot of people are surprised that a handful of states still have child responsibility laws on the books for parents' medical debts. And these laws have been on the books since colonial times, and they weren't enforced for many decades until a couple of years ago. Pennsylvania sued a child for his estranged father's nursing home bills and won. So I think we're going to be seeing more of this, and it really proves the point that we need to engage in some planning for future possible long-term care issues.
I mean, you just hit on something there. Is the case to be made you need to be more careful than ever, because maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, maybe the feeling was, oh, let's give these people a break. Whereas now corporations and entities hire lawyers as profit-making machines. Find in the law where we can get some more money. I mean, is that too harsh?
I think everyone is bottom line driven and, so focused on dollars. Everything is monetized. Kids with YouTube channels. How can I make money from this? No one has hobbies just, for the sake of enjoying themselves. So I think, to the extent, and again, you hit the nail on the head, to the extent that everyone is so bottom line focused, we all need to be more careful and better educated. The law is not always user-friendly, so you need to educate yourselves or you will get steamrolled.
Yeah, interesting. Now, there's a lot of different things. We can't cover them all. That's why people should buy the book. Trusts, second marriage planning, the internal laws of love and money, eliminating personal roadblocks to wealth. You cover all that, but what I want to talk to you about is, because I'm wondering, what in the world is that? What is the love contract?
Well, the love contract is kind of like an umbrella term for all of these subcontracts. So a prenup, a postnup, a cohabitation agreement, those are all types of love contracts. And I started using the term love contract instead of, calling the document a cohabitation agreement, because someone can try to get out of it by saying, well, I only stayed at your place 4 nights a week, so we weren't technically cohabiting. I like the love contract term because it really emphasizes my opinion, which is all of these protections should be built on a foundation of love and respect. And, to the critics who say that this is unromantic, a contract is as romantic or unromantic as the clauses you have in it. At its essence, a contract is simply a written exchange of promises. It can be viewed as an extension of your wedding vows. In the wedding vows, I promise to love and honor you. Well, in the love contract, I'm going to put some flesh on those bones and tell you how I plan to love you and what our life is going to look like. So I think when we put something in writing, and we see this with New Year's resolutions, we are more likely to remember it. You know, how many arguments between couples start with, well, you said, I didn't say, you know, if we're able to point to a writing, we can reduce faulty recollections and faulty expectations.
Well, words of wisdom. And on that note, as we close out here, Ann-Margaret, do you have any closing thoughts on really protecting yourself via all these different legal mechanisms?
Well, you know, again, I think that legal protections are the next frontier in personal finance. And in Dr. Phil's foreword, he says money problems are not solved by money alone. You know, without a strong financial foundation, and I get into that, you know, within the internal roadblock section, and I lay out the process that took me from being in debt up to my eyeballs to a successful business owner. We talk about why most lottery winners lose it all within 3 years. So we need legal protections and we need a money foundation. And I try to present both in the book, Love and Money.
Well, the book is Love and Money, Protecting Yourself from Angry Exes, Wacky Relatives, Con Artists, and Inner Demons. Ann-Margaret, where can people find the book?
Amazon and Barnes & Noble for sure.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Ann-Margaret, for joining us. I certainly appreciate it, and it's been a lot of fun and very eye-opening.
It was great. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that program as much as I did. And as I said at the beginning of the show, please do tell your friends about the crime scene. And as always, be careful out there. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.